Stay tuned for tonight's adventure with the Fat Man.
Okay, here we go. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever time of day it is. I hope it's good to be where you are, because I'm really excited to be here today. My name is Baltimore Fats, and this is the continuation of the Poe Chronicles. Yeah, okay. All right, so they got me the other day, but I think I got them today. I left a little bit by the wayside, but that's just more for later. All right, so we're going with the Poe family now, and of course, Edgar Allan Poe being the archetype of the starving artist, the helpless romantic. You know, he needs to have a tragic origin story. And his is one of the most tragic origin stories of all. He's born in Boston, the second child of actors David and Elizabeth Eliza Poe. His father abandons the family in 1810, and his mother dies the following year, leaving Edgar an orphan at about the age of 3 years old. Right? And so he's fostered in by the John and Frances Allen family of Richmond, Virginia, which is where he gets the Allen in his name. All right, so now, but in getting in with the Poe family, we're going to go right through Falcon's Maze and start with his father. All right, and so his father is one David Poe Jr., who I like to refer to as Disposable David. We'll see why. All right, but, you know, he's the son of David Poe Sr., and so David Poe Sr. was this Irish immigrant who's a well-respected and wealthy Baltimore merchant, and we're going to talk all about him in a minute. Right? But he was also a Revolutionary War hero. Right? And so as the son of a wealthy, well-respected Baltimore merchant and Revolutionary War hero, there were certain expectations put on David Poe Jr., as I'm sure there were on all his brothers and sisters. Right? But he defies his family's wishes to become a lawyer, and he becomes an actor instead, because in 1806, when he was about 22, he meets Elizabeth Eliza Arnold Hopkins. All right, so he runs away, right? But he's considered an inferior actor compared to his wife, and we're going to talk all about her as an actress and so forth in her own episode, right? Because he suffers from stage fright, and one critic says the gentleman was literally nothing. And so he can't really handle the fact that his young wife here is the star of the show, and this really talented actress, and he sucks. And so he bolts, he takes off, he abandons the family. And he literally just drops out of the story until he's dead like 2 years later. So that doesn't give me much to go on with him. So we're going to need to look at his father, right? And so who David Poe Sr. was. And now the funny thing about David Poe Sr., given his stature as a wealthy Baltimore businessman and Revolutionary War hero, there is not a Wikipedia page about him. And so, you know, so without being able to locate a wiki page for David Poe Sr., the first things that I learned about him is what's here on Junior's page, and it's just a little bit about his Revolutionary War service, you know, and that he was a wealthy guy, and that, you know, he supplies Marquis de Lafayette's army with clothes and stuff like this, right? And, you know, he's earned the honorary title of general for his service, right? And one of the things that's been driving me crazy about my research into Poe is how horribly, and I mentioned this in the last episode, is how horribly written and edited some of this stuff is. Because this is the thing that really threw me for a loop in the take I did the other day, right? As I'm reading along this stuff, it's so poorly organized and written and edited. Yet Edgar Allan Poe is one of the greatest writers of the modern era, creator of so much of the popular fiction that we have today, was a renowned literary editor and critic. And so much of this stuff is just atrociously put together. It just boggles my mind. So, of course, this just made me want to go look and see what else I could find about David Poe Sr., because it just seemed like, God, he must have been a pretty big deal. You know, it's curious that there isn't a wiki page about him, but I did find this Facebook group called The Macabre Edgar Allan Poe, right? And so they have this post here, remembering David Poe Sr. on the anniversary of his death, October 17th, 1816. All right, and so what it says here, it says that the general, right, he was born in County Cavan, and he comes to the American colony, settling in Baltimore, where he becomes a respected and influential citizen. His business was making spinning wheels and clock reels. And when I read that, my apophenia just ran wild immediately, and it made me wonder if he knew David Rittenhouse. And David Rittenhouse, as you may or may not remember, was brought up in the Here We Go Round the Orrery Bush episode I did some time back, right? His name literally means Knight of the House. But what he was most famous for were building a couple of orreries. And what the orrery is, of course, is this geared machine, this tool that science and the university system used to promote heliocentrism by giving it a physical representation, something that the mind could relate to when looking at the equations. And without them, who knows if heliocentrism would have ever really taken off. And so seeing that David Poe Sr. made what was called clock reels, I thought that was amazing. And so I wanted to follow this through further, because spinning wheels, what was a spinning wheel? A spinning wheel is this. And I saw this, and my mind just exploded to Rumpelstiltskin for reasons that may or may not clear up for me as we go on with this thing. But I don't know. That was my immediate thought, Rumpelstiltskin, seeing this thing. But so now David Poe Sr. making spinning wheels or the spinner's weasel, right? The clock reel, which has this gear work in it. Which again, a little disappointing that clock reel didn't necessarily mean like clockworks for big clocks, grandfather clocks, things like that, but for these spinning machines. But that's what the orrery does. It spins around and around, right? And so with some of the connections we're going to make about Poe Sr. going forward, it's not inconceivable to me that he could have known David Rittenhouse. All right, so let's keep going. As quartermaster out of Baltimore here, he's given a lot of responsibility. He transports a large portion of the French allies from Baltimore by sea and across the Susquehanna River. So I don't know necessarily, does that mean he went over to France and brought these guys back and up to the Susquehanna River? But this is going to get more interesting as we go back because, David Poe Sr. wasn't necessarily, we're going to find out he wasn't from Baltimore. He was actually from Lancaster County, right, which is where he met his wife. And now this is where it starts to get interesting with the names that I saw in that first video, Dickinson and Fox, because Lancaster County is Quaker country, right? And Fox being the family name that starts the Quaker movement, right? So it's, everything it's starting to pull itself together here. So he becomes really wealthy in his spinning wheel business, and he becomes so well respected with it by his service. And he's so patriotic that as a 71-year-old man, he takes up arms and fights the British during the War of 1812. Absolutely unbelievable stories about his paternal grandfather. And it's something that while looking at the modern documentaries that I watched, and like I said, on the wiki page, I don't know how much they go into on the wiki page. See, that's maybe... Yeah, because even on Poe's page, they don't talk about his grandfather at all. Some of them do mention just briefly that his grandfather was a Revolutionary War hero, but they don't talk about like what he did and where his family was from and so forth. And other than that, he was an Irish immigrant from County Cavan. And so when I found out these incredible stories, I was like, okay, now I'm going to do my favorite game of see how far I can bring the family back on this Genie page, right? Because I brought some fans, I don't remember the name of the episode now, but the one I followed it back 30 some names or something like that, 50 names or something. It was crazy. All right, so I just decided to see how far I could follow him back. And so here we go with that, right? Okay, so they put him as born in Cavan, Ireland, right, 1742-ish, right? And he's the son of John M. Poe. Click on John M. Poe, right? Also born, County Cavan. I certainly hope I'm doing that even any sort of justice, right? He's the son of David Poe of Dring, and I like when they have territorial sort of surname additions, right? He's the son of, and this is interesting, the son of John and Anthony Poe. Right? He has two fathers, both named Poe, which is kind of incredible. I follow him back, right? And he's the son of David Poe of Scottish Covenanter, 1667. And I think that's as far back as it goes, right? Father of John Poe. So you can follow David Poe of Scottish Covenanter, 1667. And I love this. This is an estimated birthday for him. And this is amazing because I didn't make this connection before seeing what we're going to find out going ahead, right? But it says estimated birth between 1555 and 1616. Now, always throwing monkey wrenches at me. Okay, so now all right, so this is going to give me something to look at as we go ahead, because this 1555 date for him, if he's who I'm thinking he is, this crazy, crazy date. All right, so when I first saw this, I was like, okay, what the heck is a Covenanter, right? And so what the Covenanters were, okay, and so who the Covenanters were, they were groups of Irish and Scottish Presbyterians. Essentially, it was ubiquitous with the Church of Scotland, actually, but Presbyterianism itself begins in Ireland, as we'll see. And so they were vehemently opposed to King Charles's attempted reforms of the Church of Scotland, right? And they banded together and they signed a contract with the parliamentary forces at the time. And now this is all at the very beginning of the English Civil War, which has huge implications to the things that were happening here in Maryland and in Baltimore at the time, which I haven't gotten to in the show yet. So it's really amazing that Edgar Allan Poe's family ties directly back to these Covenanters, right, who are a big part of this English Civil War, right? And so they sign a contract with the Parliament, right, a covenant, if you will, right, to help the Parliament unite the different Protestant movements together in opposition to the Crown and papal authority, right? That's what they're all about. And the name of that contract is the Solemn League and Covenant, right? And this document went about to all the different Presbyterian groups through Scotland and Ireland, and they pledged allegiance essentially to the Parliament. So in the end, there's a series of wars about all of this, and the Poe family is deeply involved in this, right? But in the end, at some point, the Crown is victorious, and although while a lot of the Covenanters are pardoned, David Poe is among those who are not. And so who were these Presbyterians who wanted to unite the Protestant movement against the Holy See and the papal authority of the Crown, right? And so what the Presbyterians were in their reform, in their Protestantism, right? They trace their origins back to, right, in the era of the English Civil Wars, they follow a strict Calvinism, but they trace their origins much further back to the church found by one Saint Columba. I think that's a really sort of amazing name to come across, especially around this time of year and with some of the things that are going on, and how Columba ties back, going back into the ancient religions and stuff like that. But so, just quickly, this saint, he starts out in Ireland and he travels across Scotland, and he creates this Iona Abbey in Scotland on the island of Iona, right? And it's from here that Scottish Presbyterianism really spreads, right? And it is initially holds very true to a Celtic Christian tradition, right? And it even has different observances of Easter than the Roman Catholic Church, which is going to be really interesting going forward, right? So this Presbyterianism traces its roots back through early Celtic Christian traditions that go back to the earliest times of Christianity, right? And that's going to be important going forward, right? But I found out about this, so I was just kind of blown away by this whole Covenanter thing and, finding out exactly what they were. And so a little bit later on is when I had found this resource here. And this goes into a lot of detail about the Poe family involvement in the Covenanter movement. And it is absolutely incredible. Because what we have here is the story of David Poe, the immortal Covenanter, right? And his flight from Scotland to Ireland as a fugitive from the crown, right? But before I can tell you that story, I need to tell you this story, right? And that starts back here at the Wandering Poe. And just another couple quick breadcrumbs about the Poe River Valley there. That's also where Turin is, as in, the Shroud of Turin, right? Turin is there, but also Ravenna, which is a very important northern Italian cultural center and perhaps could have influenced Poe with the Raven, who knows, right? And so the tale that this historian here tells of how the Poes came to settle in Ayrshire, right, and more specifically Polkelly Castle and Irvine in Ayrshire, right, is that these families were on the run from the south of France because they were running from the Roman Crusade massacre of the Albigenses, right, at the hands of one coincidentally named Arnold. And as we go back to going back to the first episode, that hand was pointing to Arnold, and we know that Poe's mother's maiden name was Arnold, and we're going to get all into that in her episode, right? But it's apparently this Arnold who coins the phrase, kill them all, God will know his own, or as we know it today, kill them all and God will sort them out, right? So I wanted to look into this. So what were the Albigenses, and who was this Arnold, abbot of Citeus? And so he was this Roman Catholic Cistercian abbot, right, who played a prominent role in the Albigensian Crusade. Right? So who were the Albigensians? The Albigensians were the Cathars. All right, so what this historian is saying is that Poe's family traces itself back to the Cathars, and that they could have been at this Béziers, this massacre at Béziers, where the Roman Catholic Church came in and just slaughtered the Cathars. And so if you just need just a quick refresher on the Cathars. The Cathars were an early Christian sect that had a lot of Celtic influence, and they believed in dualism. They believed in two gods, right? The good God who created all things spiritual and that which you wanted to try to attain, right? And then the bad God who created the material and the world that we live in today, right? And this really rubbed the Roman Catholic Church the wrong way, and so they went after them. But the other thing about the Cathars is that they may have had refuge from Mary Magdalene and the bloodline of Jesus, right? And so now this is very interesting, because now if the Poe family goes back as far as the Cathars, who knows how close they could be to this kind of thing, right? And I think that's really amazing. Maybe not close at all, and it could be completely coincidental, but it does make the mind spin, right? It's hard to spin a better tale than connecting the Poe family to the Cathars and perhaps the Merovingian bloodlines. And when you tie that, it also has this Celtic influence to Presbyterianism out of Scotland, right? It just gets even more amazing, because the very first reference that is found in Irvine and so here it says, the earliest found trace of Poe's in Irvine was in a 1540 Latin grant of land to the Church of Irvine, which translates as, in the first, to wit, an annual rent of 20 from Templar land between the land of the deceased, right? So we have a Poe on a Latin land grant to a Church of Irvine that mentions Templar land, and the Templars are deeply involved in the Cathar, right? And it's always, it's funny. I tend not to think that much of the Templars these days, because once something has reached such a mainstream threshold as the Templars have, and this story of the Merovingian bloodline and so forth, it just makes me think red herring, right? But it's amazing to see it turn up here with Poe and in Scotland, where the Poe family finds itself in this Pokelly, right? Especially with Pokelly meaning wood by the pool, stream, or burn. And we know the important part that river basins and the like play in settlements and in mythology and things like that. And I think it's very interesting that this district in Ayrshire, right, at the time belonged to the Muirs of Roallan, right? And to see that at the end, Allen, and spelled exactly the same way, that can't be a coincidence as we pull this thing together, right? So the Poe family finds itself as Cathar refugees in Scotland, sheltered by and fighting for the Presbyterian cause, right? And so that's where we're going to end this one, and we're going to pick the story up with the immortal David Poe, the Covenanter of 1667, and his flight from Scotland to Ireland. And so remember, just because you don't know the truth doesn't mean you can't have fun with the lie. I hope you had fun with this one, guys. Until the next one, cheers.